Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scrivener, and many years ago I did the tag and I loved it, and I have no idea who the original of this is or if that video still exists, so I'm just gonna go based on what I said, which I tend to paraphrase questions, so this is definitely not going to be the greatest recreation of that. However, I am going to will spring into existence on the first day of spring, and I am excited for this. I went outside and it was warm and I took my coat off and I walked in the like 8-degree weather as snow melted around me today, and I was excited. So I love spring. It is my favorite time of year because everything comes alive, everything is beautiful, and I just really love having beauty around me and having warmth and reminding that winter will not last forever and that we will have joy again. And yeah, I just love it. It is my favorite and I'm really excited. So without all ado, I will bring into question one and ask, what are you most excited to read in spring? So I don't know. I'm excited to be able to read again. I'm currently in school and have been kind of under a heap of like anxiety and stress. So coming mid-April, I will be able to do reading again, and I'm really excited for that. But so far, I am mostly only reading The Hobbit, and I'm enjoying this. I'm reading with my nephew, who is 7, and we are reading it together, and it is lovely. And I'm hoping that soon we are going to finish that because we're about halfway through, and then I'm going to read The Lord of the Rings for the first time. These are my very old versions of The Lord of the Rings. My sister, my nephew's mother, bought them for me many years ago, and if you've been here for a while, you know I have gone on a journey with not reading Lord of the Rings year after year after year after year. So I'm excited to go on that journey and to share that with my nephew and to indoctrinate him into the cult of reading. I also have a secondary answer which is linked into the second question, because the second question is, what books make you feel like spring? And for me, this is an odd thing, which is Jane Austen and like the Brontes. I feel like as I'm kind of going through the end of this like kind of murky, muddy time, I kind of want to read classic literature and have the joy of that. And yeah, it's always like Jane Austen, and now I've read all of Jane Austen, and I read Jane Austen like every spring for the last 3-4 years, and it has made me very happy. And I think I'm going to do Brontë this year because I read Jane Eyre before, and I've now read Wuthering Heights. So my current plan as it sits, who knows what this plan is going to be, that my next big classic kind of endeavor is going to be The Tenant of Wildfell Hill by Anne Brontë, right? Anne Brontë? Yeah. And yeah, I think that this is gonna be great. I also just read The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, and this is a book by Katie Lumsden, who is a fellow booktuber, and her writing is just really great, and she references the Brontes a lot, and it's very gothic and stuff, and this one deals with many different dynamics that I've been wanting to dive in for a very long time. And this is a book that they read in Hartwood Hall, and I want to see all the comparisons between the two as well. I feel like that might actually put me over the hump after 5 years of being like, I'm gonna read this book and not reading that book. I read books slowly, but I will get there eventually. So yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna read, and I'm really excited to just like have a book that I'm reading every single day and just slowly plodding along until one day I'm done, because I'm a very slow reader. But yes, that is what I think about in spring. Long classics and beautifulness. And if you're not weird like me and like big classics in spring, I really thought of Violeta, and I think of life stories in this way because it just feels like you're going through every year with them, and spring feels like new growth and development and all of those things. So I think that when I think of this book, which is such a beautiful book and has such beautiful like flowers and stuff, it is a book by Isabel Allende, and it is translated from the Spanish, and she's a Chilean author, and it looks at this one woman, Violeta's life from 1920 when she's born until she dies in 2020. And it's not really pandemic focused at all, like it's mostly just focused on her life and being a woman throughout the 20th century. And it is such a beautiful book, and it kind of gaps that life because it goes from this almost classic feeling and you age with the characters throughout the life. And that's what I feel about spring. It's like regrowth and you reminder about how much we've grown as people and stuff. So I think that this book is such a great book for spring. I think that even though Isabel Allende is such a well-known author, this book has not gotten the hype that it deserves. Question number 3 has something to do with days becoming longer and the longest book that we have ever read. And the longest books that I've ever read are Anna Karenina, David Copperfield, and Vanity Fair. I love Anna Karenina. It is a book that I treasure. Vanity Fair and David Copperfield, I felt both dragged at parts and definitely should have been trimmed, and I think that that's because they were done serially and they were published month by month or week by week and have a lot of fluff in them and repeated themselves a little too much. I really love the beginning of Vanity Fair, and then the end just kind of bored me. And David Copperfield I liked more and more as I went on, and I appreciated some of the end. So those are books that I don't know if I would say I would recommend the whole books, but they're books that I really find interesting. And Anna Karenina is just a book that is very close to my heart. And I feel like even as time goes on, I like love it more and more and want to revisit. And question number 4 says, days are getting brighter. What is a day that brightens your day? And this is a book that is so sad because I only know what sadness is. And this is Soul Lanterns by Kuzki. And this is a recommendation by Cara from the Wilde Book Garden. And I am so glad that she recommended the book because I love it so much and have such a tenderness for it. It is a book that was published a little while ago, but has been translated more recently from Japan. And it is by an author who is a second generational survivor of the atomic bomb. And she was born and raised in Hiroshima. And this book looks at the same idea. It's set 25 years after. And it's these children that live in a city that was once destroyed, but they don't really know the history. And it's such an interesting thing because it's such a well-known part of our history. But we're looking at 1970 and being like in a place that we know something bad happened here, but we're not really sure all of these stories. And it is really sad because we're looking at all these people where like millions of people died. However, we're also looking at the story of people reconnecting and finding family and sharing trauma and sharing the stories of their life, and how this group of like 12-year-olds are creating art to help those who came before them remember the people they lost and to remember the parents and grandparents that they lost. And it is such a touching book that I love so much. And it is written in like really simple prose, but like so evocative. And though you will cry in it, I think you will end the book with hope and thinking and going around and being like, how can I show love in that way to people around me? How can I help people remember the things that are loved? And how can I talk about the atrocities that were committed and also bring reconciliation to people who are so hurt by that grief? And it's just such a lovely book. And question number 5 is, how have you developed as a reader? Because obviously spring is growth and development. And it was so interesting because when I filmed this in 2020, I was talking about how I had kind of transitioned a lot from fantasy to reading more literary fiction and horror. And I think that those things are really true of me still, that I'm still in my literary fiction era, and I really, really appreciate that. I was watching a video by Mina lately, and she was talking about how being in an era is such like a cool thing to say because it acknowledges the fact that we are not stagnant people and that we go through eras and that going through an era is not bad. And I'm like, yeah, I will probably, you know, circle around and go through many different eras, but I'm still in that kind of era, and I've transitioned into different, more like sub areas because I feel like you start somewhere and you get more and more niche. And I feel like that's what I've been doing with literary fiction. I just like books, and I like books that, you know, don't have anything happen in them, but talk a lot about characters primarily. So yeah, I'll probably change again, but I think that that is still like the era that I'm in. I think that that has allowed me to be more calmer about the books that I'm reading. Oh, I think I've also fully immersed myself in like my classic era because 90% of the time I'm like, okay, I would love more than anything to read classic books and like just take my time with classic books and like enjoy them as literature because I just love old books. And I've always like liked old books, but for a long time, like I wanted them to be done. I wanted them on a checklist, and just being okay with just like loving old books and spending lots of time with them is something that I really, really treasure and love now. So yeah. And yeah, this is my first year where I'm like, I put my reading goal only at 100, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna get there because the next question talks about it's a few months into the year, how are you doing? I read 16 books and it's March 21st at the time of recording, and that is lower. I think in the video that I filmed 3 years ago, I was like, yeah, I read about 15 books a month. And yeah, that is not the era I'm in. I just repeat words sometimes when I start using them. I'm like, should I lower it or should I just be okay with the fact that I might fail my goal this year? And I know that 100 books is a lot of books, but for a long time it wasn't a lot of books. And yeah, I don't know. I'm much more patient with myself. And I think I've read so much that I'm happy with reading slower books and enjoying what I enjoy and not feeling that. And being more kind to books as well. Like I enjoyed being a very harsh reviewer for a long time, and I still enjoy being critical and stuff, but I think that my compassionate side of being like, oh, they tried and I want to see what they're doing and all of that has come out much more. And I enjoy being that person much more than being harsh. Although I do think that like I agree and support critical analysis and being not judgmental, but being aware of the flaws of a book. But I'm also become more kind maybe. And then the last and final question talks about what plans you have going forward. And I'm sorry that I'm referring a lot to this video that I made 3 years ago, but in that I talk about how I want to read Canadian books and talk about Canadian literature because I realized that I just have like nothing. Like I have a desert of ever reading them, and this was around the time when I discovered that I hadn't read like any Canadian books. And I think I've read a lot. Like I focused on reading Canadian literature and reading more Canadian literature over the last few years, and I'm still nowhere near caught up, but that is something where I find that it has taken me 3 years, but I'm finally in a place where I feel like I can start making content about that literature. And I think that's funny, you talking about patience before as well. In that thing, I'm talking about how I want to read more Canadian literature and make content about Canadian literature, but I think it kind of took me 3 years of reading and being absorbed and being aware of that to feel like I actually can talk about it well. And not that you can't talk about something when you don't have a full understanding of it, and I think I should be better at doing that, but I also appreciate the fact that I've taken the time and now I feel like I can be at least somewhat more aware of Canadian literature. I'm still very far away from being as aware of it as I think I feel like I should be, because I'm more aware of other countries' literature than I am of the ones that I'm currently reading. But I appreciate the fact that I can talk about it, and hopefully I'll be making some videos and analysis around that. And yeah, I don't really have any plans, and I feel like my plans may change in May as I kind of enter a new stage of my life again, but let's see what happens, and let me know what your plans are and like how you've changed as a reader, what era you're in, and all of those things. I would love to see you in the comments, and I'll talk to you next time. Like and subscribe if you like sadness as your soul as well, because you'll find home here, you know? We like sadness.